Theories is a specific kind of silence that only exists underground. It is not a peaceful silence. It is heavy. It presses against your arms, smelling of ozone, stale electricity, and old dust. We take public transit every day, surrounded by hundreds of strangers, and we feel safe in the crowd. But have you ever stopped to think about what happens when the crowd leaves? When the rush hour ends, the sun sets, and you are the only living thing sitting in a metal box, hurtling through a dark tunnel at most 60 miles per hour. The train becomes a different world after midnight. The laws of physics seem to bend. The distances between stations feel longer. The people you meet are wrong. Welcome back to Grim Reality Logs. I am the Mysterious Nomad, your guide through the glitches and the shadows. Tonight, we are riding the rails until the end of the line. I have compiled accounts from night shift workers, commuters, thin and lost souls who took the late train and saw things they were never meant to see. After you enjoyed this visit, if you do the unknown, please subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps keep the lights on in this dark corner of the internet. Now, mind the gap. Log number 1. The Observer. This happened in 1999. I was working as a trauma nurse at a hospital in Queens, New York. My shifts were brutal, usually 12 hours long, ending at 3 in the morning. At the heart, the city that never sleeps is actually just a city that is passing out drunk. I took the subway home. Usually it would take a cab, but money was tight, and the subway was $2. I swiped my card and walked down to the platform. It was deserted. The air down there is always thick, hot, and smells like burning rubber and urine. That night, at Valcauder Tanush, when the train screeched into the station, the cars were mostly empty. I stepped into the third car from the back and sat down in the middle, facing the doors. I always sat there. It felt safer to see both ends of the car. As the doors had shut, he realized I was not alone. At the very far end of the car, in the corner seat, there was a man. He was wearing a heavy, dark gray wool coat that looked too warm for September. He had a head polo, so I could not see his face, just a shadow where his eyes should be. He was not moving. He was not reading a newspaper. He was strictly rigid, facing forward, his hands folded neatly in his lap. I pulled a book out of my back, trying to ignore him. The train lurched forward, rattling into the dark tunnel. The lights in the 1980s Subway cars were terrible. They would buzz and flicker constantly. We had a road patch of track. The lights got out completely for about 3 seconds. Darkness. Just the sound of the wheels grinding against the steel. When the lights buzzed back on, instantly looked down the car. My heart hammered against my ribs. The man was no longer in the corner seat. He was now sitting 3 rows closer to me. I froze. There was no way he could have walked that distance in 3 seconds of darkness while I'm hearing footsteps. The floor was sticky, shoes made noise. He had moved silently, and he was still in the exact same pose. Hands folded, rigidity, head facing forward. I tell myself I was crazy. I told myself he had been sitting there the whole time and I was dissonant. I went back to my book, but I did not read a single word. My ears were straining, listening for the slide of fabric or the squeak of a shoe. Nothing. Just the writhy clacking of the train. And the train entered another turn. The screeching was deafening, and his eyes flickered out again. This time, they stayed up for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Up. The fluorescent tubes flickered on. I dropped my book. He was right across from me. He was sitting directly on the bench opposite mine. I could see the texture of his small coat. I could smell him. He did not smell like a homeless person or a drunk. He smelled like wet earth. like sorrel after a rainstorm. And under the hat, I saw his face. He did not have one. It was just Smith pale skin. No eyes, no mouth. Just the blank slate of flash where a human face should be. I wanted to scream, but my throat side up. I was paralyzed. The train was slowing down for my stop. The brakes squealed loud and parsing. The manner the thing tilted its head to the side, like a dog listening to a whistle. The doors hissed stay open. I did not think. I just ran. I scrambled out of the seat, tripped over my own feet, and threw myself onto the platform. I scrambled up the stairs, lens burning, not looking back until I was above ground on the street level under the orange glow of the street lights. I never took the train line again. I moved to a different apartment 2 weeks later. But sometimes when I am in a quiet room, I can still smell the scent of a cafetiere, and I wonder what would feel like happened if the lights hadn't gone on. Block number 12. The Mimic. We moved from the grid of New York to the sterile, cold underground of a modern metro system. This story was sent in by a user who calls himself David. David wrote, I am not a superstitious guy. I work in it. I deal with logic, code, and predictable outcomes. But what happened to me on the red line last winter defies every bit logic if. It was a Tuesday. I had stayed late at the office to finish a server migration. It was around 4 or 5 p.m. when I finally swiped my piece. The station was gleaming white, polished tile, very modern. It was completely empty. I popped my headphones on, but the battery was dead. I sighed and put them back in my pocket. I would have to endure the silence. When the train arrived, it was one of those new automated ones without a driver. Just one long connecting tube where you can see from one end of the train to the other. I got on and sat near the middle. There was not a single other person on the entire train. I checked. I looked left, I looked right. Empty seats for 100 yards in both directions. The train started moving smoothly. The hum of the electric motor was hypnotic. About 2 stops in, he heard it. It was a sound coming from the seat directly behind me. 这好zy. He will. Breathing. It was slow, rhythmic, and wet. It sounded like someone with a severe chest cold struggling to pull air through clogged lungs. I stiffened. I knew for a fact the car was empty. I thought maybe it was the air conditioning venting or mechanical issues by. I turned my head slightly to the side to listen better. The breathing stopped immediately. I waited. Silence. Just the hum of the train. I turned back to face forward. Hello. Hoorah. Aha. It started aging. Instantly. And it was louder. It sounded like it was right at my ear level, just behind the plastic headrest of my seat. A cold prickle of sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I decided to test it. I held my own breath. The breathing behind me continued for 1 second, and then it faltered. It stopped too. I exhaled sharply. The breathing by me exhaled sharply, mimicking my exact rhythm, but with the same wet, rattling quality. Okay, he thought. Someone is messing with me. Maybe a kid is hiding under the seats. I stood up abruptly and with around readied configure it was. Hey, I shouted. The seat behind me was empty. The floor was empty. I looked under the benches. Nothing. I looked down the length of the car. Nothing. I was alone. I sat back down, but this time I sat sideways, with my back to the window, scanning the car. I was not going to let anything get behind me. For 3 minutes, it was quiet. I started to relax. Maybe it was the he taxed the fart, maybe, don't know. And I felt it. I felt warm. Moist air hit the back of my neck. I was sitting with my back against the glass window. There was nothing behind me but the tunnel wall rushing by at 50 miles per hour. But I felt the break. Hot, wet, rotten. Oh wait, it was coming from the glass. I slowly turned my head to look at the reflection in the window. The train was going through a dark section, so the glass acted like a mirror. I had kept my own reflection. Hell, terrified, and hovering darkly behind my reflection, peering over my shoulder in the glass, was a face. It was grey with hollow eyes in a mouth that hung open, eyeing like a snake. It wasn't in the car with me. It was in the reflection. I screamed and scrambled to the other side of the car, thinking the reflection didn't move. It stayed in the window, watching the empty seat where I had just been. When the train pulled into the next station, I didn't wait for the doors to open fully. I pried them apart and squeezed out. I told the station attendant that there was a drunk guy harassing people on the train just to get them to check it is. They detained the train for 10 minutes. They searched every inch of it. They found nothing. No person. No equipment filler. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. When I got home and looked in the mirror to brush my teeth for a split second, I saw my mouth hang open slightly too wide, and I heard the wet, rattling breath come out of my own throat. I think whoever was on the train followed me home. Not physically, but it stuck to me now. Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I can hear a breathing from the other side of my bedroom mirror. Look number 3. The unscheduled stop. We often assume that the train tracks are a closed loop. We assume that if we stay on the train, we will eventually reach a platform, a station, or at least a bit. But what if the tracks just end? What if the train keeps going anyway? This story comes from a man named Elias who takes the commuter rail from Chicago to the suburbs. Elias wrote it was mid-February. A blizzard had been hammering the Midwest for 3 days straight. The visibility was near zero. I caught the 11:15 p.m. Met train out of Union Station. I was the only person in my car, except for a sleeping businessman 3 rows ahead. The ride is usually 45 minutes. I sat by the window, watching the mayfly pass horizontally. It looked like static on an old television screen. The train was rocking gently, the heater was blasting, and I was dozing off. I woke up because the motion stopped. I checked my watch. It was 12:30 a.m. We had been moving for over an hour. We should have been at the end of the line by now. I wiped the condensation off the windows to see which station we were at. I expected to see the concrete platform, the yellow heavy strip, maybe a parking lot. Instead, I saw trees. Thick, dense pine trees were pressed right against the glass, their branches waving exist at the metal of the train car. We were not at a station. We were not even on a siding. We were in the middle of a deep forest. I stood up and looked down the aisle. The businessman was still asleep. The overhead lights were humming loudly. Then the intercom crackled. Usually, the conductor sounds bored or tired. This time, the voice was trembling. It sounded like a man who was holding back tears. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice shook. This is the final stop. Please, forget for by me. I have to go now. The intercom clicked off. I felt a pit form in my stomach. I walked to the vestibule between the cars and looked out the door window. It's all the conductor. He had mentally opened the emergency door in the first car. He stepped down into the snow. The snow was waist deep. He was not wearing a coat, just his uniform shirt. He didn't look back at the train. He didn't check for passengers. He just started wading into the trees, walking directly away from the tracks, disappearing into the blood. Hey, I yelled, banging on the glass. Where are you going? He did turn around. The teacher's eye just kept walking until the white types moved him. I went back to my seat, my heart racing. I pulled out my phone to call 911. No signal. Searching, it said. That is when I realized something impossible. I looked out the window again, down toward the ground. The train lights cast a glow on the snow. There were no tracks. The train was resting on top of the snow. There was no disturbed earth, no steel rails, no wooden ties. Just unbroken, pristine snow. The train had driven off the raised miles ago, or it had been tempered here, but it was sitting flat on the first floor. Then the banging started. It came from the roof. Thump, thump, thump. It was heavy. It sounded like someone walking on top of the metal car. But the footsteps were too far apart. Whatever it was, it each tried about 10 feet. Thump. Paused. Thump. It was moving from the back of the train toward the front. Toward my car. I stepped over to the sleeping businessman and shook him awake. Wake up. We have the hideout. He craned, blinking at me. What? Are we in Naperville? Listen to me. I hesitated. The ceiling dented inward. Right above the row of seats behind us, the metal roof buckled down as if something incredibly heavy hide. The pane cracks. The businessman looked up, his eyes going wide. What is that? Get down, I whispered. We dove onto the floor, squeezing ourselves into the gap between the seats. The floor was filthy, wet with melted snow and grit. The thing stopped jerkily above us. For a long minute, there was only the sound of the wind howling outside. Then, a long, metallic screech tore through the air. It sounded like a can opener cutting through aluminum. I looked up. A singular, massive club-like and glistening like obsidian hand pierced right the roof of the train. It was the side of a cider. It rotated slowly, slicing a hole in the ceiling. Snow fell through the hole, landing on the seats. The glow retracted. Then an eye appeared at the hole. It was yellow reptilian and the size of a dinner plate. It swiveled, looking down into the car. I held my breath. I prayed the businessman wouldn't scream. The eyes scanned the empty seats. It seemed confident. It blinked, a translucent eyelid sliding sideways. 10. From outside in the woods came a sound it will never forget. It was Takander's voice. But it wasn't screaming in pain. It was screaming in ecstasy. It was lowing. A high, broken, hysterical laugh that echoed the trees. The eye snapped away from the hole. The weight on the roof shifted. We heard the creature leap off the train, landing in the snow with a massive crunch. We heard it tearing through the trees, moving toward the ladder. We lay on that floor for 6 hours until the sun came up. When we finally gathered courage to open the doors and walk out, we found a road out to Mall's Soul. We were in a state park 40 miles away from the nearest train track. The Subway companions denied everything. They said the train has suffered a mechanical failure on the main line and we're hallucinating from carbon monoxide poisoning. But you know what is so? And I know that the conductor is still out there somewhere in the woods, lowing in the dark. Lock number 4. The loop subways are designed to be confusing. Hey, you're mazed, but they are a logical maze. Lock number 4 comes from a woman named Sarah who discovered vague fatality happens when the logic breaks. Sarah wrote, I live in London. The tube is a part of my daily life. I know the northern line like the back of my hand. I got on at Leicester Square, heading to Camden Town. It is a short trip, it may be 10 minutes. It was rush hour, 5:30 p.m. The platform was packed. I squeezed it to a standing room only. I was pressed up against a tall man in a suit and a teenager with a backpack. The doors beeped and closed. The train accelerated. I held onto the strap, scrolling through my phone. Hold my phone. I read a few emails. I checked the news. I looked up, expecting to be at Tottenham Court Road. We were still moving. Fast. Usually, the tube takes about 2 minutes between stations. We had been moving for 5. I looked around. Nobody else seemed worried. The man in the suit was reading a newspaper. The teenager was bopping his head to music. I went back to my phone. I played a game of solitaire. That took about 4 minutes. I looked up again. Still moving. The train was going incredibly fast now. The roar of the wine was deafening. The carriage was shaking violently. "Excuse me," I said to the man in the suit. "Did we miss a stop?" He didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He just kept staring at his newspaper. He looked closer at his newspaper. Text was blurry. Not because my eyes were bad, but because the ink was literally swimming on the page. The letters were rearranging themselves. I looked at the teenager. He was bobbing his head, but the rhythm was wrong. It was too fast. Jerky. Like a video glitching. I checked my watch. We had been in the tunnel for 25 minutes. Panic started to rise in my throat. I pushed my way to the window. Outside, the tunnel was a blur of gray concrete. But then, the colors started to change. The gray turned into a pulsing pink, and a deep brownish purple. It looked like we were traveling through an artery, not a tunnel. "Is anyone else seeing this?" I shouted. No one reacted. The carriage was full of people, but they were all statues, frozen in their casual poses. Tan, the presser hit. My ears popped. My nose started to bleed. The air in the car became heavy, like we were deep underwater. Finally, after what felt like years, the train began to slow down. Brakes didn't screech, they sighed. A long, human shell. The train coasted into a station. It looked like Camden Town. The tall walls were there. The way out things were there. But everything was slightly wrong. The doors were in white and black. It was white and blonde. The way outside didn't point to the escalators. It pointed straight down into the floor and the writing on the station wall. It wasn't English. It wasn't a language. It was geometric shapes, triangles, circles, and lines that seemed to vibrate when I looked at them. Pam. The doors opened. All change. A voice announced it. But the voice came from everywhere on, not from the speakers. The other passengers, the stage was stood up in inanition. They marched off the train. They didn't walk, they marched. Left, right. They walked onto the platform and stood there facing the wall. I was the only on the foot on the train. I was terrified to get off, but I was more terrified to stay on. I stepped onto the platform. The air smelled of ozone and rotten meat. I ran for the escalator. I ran up the steps, 2 at a time. I had to get to the surface. I had to see the sky. I reached up the top of the escalator and burst through the ticket barriers. I ran onto the street. I stopped there. There was no street. There was no London. There was just a wide. Just infinite blinding white, light stretching in every direction. No buildings, no sky, no ground. Just the station and trons floating in nothingness. I turned around to run back down, but the station entrance was gone. Behind me was my void. I screamed and panicked and woke up. I was back on the train. I was stopped at Camden Town. The doors were open. Regular people were bustling off. The man in the suit brushed past me and said, "Excuse me, look." I stumbled up the train, shaking. I checked my phone. It was 5:40 p.m. The trip had taken exactly 10 minutes. But when I got home and took off my coat, I found something in my pocket. It was a tile. A ceramic tile from the station wall. It wasn't white or black. It was that same one color I saw in the nightmare. And scratched it into the surface was a triangle with a line through it. I keep it in a drawer. I don't touch it. But sometimes, late at night, he can hear the sound of a train rushing through the walls of my apartment, and he knows that somewhere in the Wi-Fi that wiped a version of me is still screaming. Lot number 5 of the terminal for our final entry. We descend to the deep past level. This story comes from a man named Frank, a subway maintenance worker with 30 years of experience under the streets of New York. Sent this to me via an encrypted email, claiming he read our URL specifically because what he found in Tunnel Sector 7. Frank wrote, "You think you know the subway because you ride it. You don't. You are a tourist. You sit in the lit cars. You look at your phone. You get off at your stop. You see maybe 1% of the system. The A's 99% belongs to us. The track walkers, the sandhogs, and it belongs to the things that were here before the city was built. It was 2 years ago. I was on the graveyard shift, tasked with inspecting a water main leak near the old city hall loop. Everyone knows about City Hall Station. It's the crown jewel of ghost stations. Beautiful, curved tiles, skyless, chandeliers. It's close to the public, but we go through it all the time. But I wasn't going to City Hall. I was going past it. My word order took me down a service tunnel to branch it off the main line of 400 yards south. This tunnel wasn't on the modern maps. It was on the old blueprints of 1904. It was labeled auxiliary storage. I was alone. Usually, we work in pairs, but my partner, Mikey, had called in sick with the flu. It was just a leak inspection. Easy money. I walked the tracks, my flashlight cutting a con through the thick dust air. The silence down there is heavy. You can feel the weight of the skyscrapers pressing down on the earth above you. I found the branch tunnel. It was marred up with rotting plywood. I pried a wood back. The air that rushed out smelled still, like a tomb that hadn't been opened in a century. But underneath the dust, there was an air smell. Perfume. Sweet floral perfume. Like lavender and rose water. It made no sense. This tunnel had been sealed since the 1940s. I squeezed through the gap and walked inside. The tunnel was narrow, brick lane. The roads were rusted almost to nothing. I walked for about 10 minutes, stepping over puddles of black sludge. Then the tunnel opened up. I found myself standing on a platform. It wasn't a storage area. It was a station. A fully built small station that I had never heard of. The tiles were pristine, neat emerald green and cream. There were brass fixtures on the walls, and there were posters, advertisements. I shined my light on them. We were advertisements for war bonds, buy bonds for victory. Loose lip sync ships. They look brand new. No peeling. No waiter damage. I walked to the edge of the platform. The third rail of the power rail was cold and dead. Hello, I called out, my voice echoed flaily. Then I saw the ticket booth at the far end of the platform. The light inside was on. A single yellow incandescent bulb was burning inside the ticket booth. That was impossible. The power grid to the section had been cut 50 years ago. There was no electricity here. I walked toward the booth slowly, gripping my heavy wrench. The lavender smell was stronger here. It was overpowering. I reached the glass window of the booth. It was empty. Here was a stool, a stack of old tickets, and a ledger open on the desk. I looked at the ledger. The ink was wet. The last entry was dated today, but beer was written as 1943. I felt the cold breeze hit the back of my neck. I spun around. On the dusty floor of the platform, there were footprints. They weren't here when I walked in. I had walked through thick dust, leaving my own heavy footprints. The senior prints were small, delicate. They looked like they were wheat, made by women wearing high heels. And they were fresh. The dust was still settling around the edges. They started from the dark tunnel mouth he had come from, and the walk right past me toward the wall behind the ticket booth. I fully told them with my light. Step! Step! Dig! Step! He led directly to the back wall. It was solid concrete, painted a dull gray. The footprints then stopped at the wall. They didn't turn around. The last footprints were half in the floor and half in the wall, as if the woman had stepped seamlessly into the concrete like it was water. I got closer. I touched the wall. It wasn't coral, hard concrete. It was warm, and it was soft. It yielded under my finger like from flesh. I pulled my hand back in horror. The gray paint wasn't paint. It was skin. The entire back wall of the station was a massive, stretching sheet of gray skin. And then the wall moved. It inhaled. The entire station expanded slightly, the tiles groaning. A voice came from inside the wall. It was muffled, wet, but clear. A woman's voice. Ticket, please. I didn't scream. I distinct thing. Instinct tick over. I turned and ran. I ran faster than I have run in my life. I scrambled through the town, tore through the plywood, and did stop until I hit the main line where the modern trains were running. I sat on the tracks, hyperventilating, until a train came by and the conductor spotted me. I quit the next day. I told them I had back problems. But here is the thing that haunts me. When I got home that morning, I took off my boots. Stuck to the sole of my left foot was a piece of paper. It was a ticket. A subway ticket from 1943. And punched it with the gut in the shape of holes where the words one way. Here, ding slapping under the city. The station errand bowl for us. We are just the moon-moving trough, the vents of something much, much bigger. And sometimes the bench is blocked and the organism wakes up to feed. We ride the train to get from point to point B. We track the journey as that time. Time to slip, time to dread, time to ignore the world. But the journey is the most dangerous part. Whether the subway or board a train, you entering a liminal space. You are in transition. You have neither here nor there. And in that space between worlds, the rules of reality are team. The next time you are on the last train of the night, look around. Look at the person sleeping in the corner. Look at the reflection in the window. Look at the walls rushing by. Are you sure that the station you left is the same one you are returning to? Are you sure the person next to you is breathing? And are you sure that when the doors open, they will open into the world you know? My advice: never be the last one the train. Because when the crowd leaves, the observers start watching. If you want to keep these locks open, leave a like and subscribe to Green Reality Likes. Let me know in the comments which story kept you up tonight. Stay safe.